Maria Thompson arrived at the sprawling estate in Long Island on a cold February morning in 1978. The 42-year-old woman clutched her worn leather handbag tightly as she walked up the marble steps of the Benedetti mansion. She needed this job desperately. After her husband died in a construction accident 6 months earlier, she had 3 children to feed and rent to pay in their small Brooklyn apartment. The butler who answered the door barely looked at her as he led her through hallways lined with expensive paintings and crystal chandeliers. Maria had cleaned houses before, but nothing like this. The floors gleamed like mirrors, and every piece of furniture looked like it belonged in a museum. She followed the butler to a sitting room where Mrs. Lucia Benedetti waited. The Mafia boss's wife was a small woman with perfectly styled blonde hair and cold blue eyes. She wore a silk dress that probably cost more than Maria made in a year. Mrs. Benedetti looked Maria up and down slowly, taking in her simple black dress and sensible shoes. The interview was short and direct. Mrs. Benedetti asked about her experience, her family, and whether she could keep her mouth shut about family business. Maria assured her that she was discreet and hard-working. She started work the next day. The Benedetti mansion had 22 rooms, and Maria was responsible for keeping the main living areas spotless. She worked alongside 2 other maids, but they were assigned to different parts of the house. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, showed her around and explained the rules. Never enter Mr. Benedetti's study without permission. Never touch the papers on any desk. Never speak unless spoken to. Always knock before entering any room. Vincent Benedetti was rarely home during Maria's first weeks. She caught glimpses of him occasionally. A tall man with silver hair and an expensive suit, always surrounded by other men in dark clothing. The other servants whispered about him when Mrs. Chen wasn't listening. They said he controlled half the shipping contracts in New York. They said men who crossed him disappeared. They said the FBI had been trying to build a case against him for years. Maria kept her head down and did her work. She dusted the heavy furniture, polished the silver, and vacuumed the Persian rugs. She learned the family's routines quickly. Mrs. Benedetti had her hair done every Tuesday and played cards with other mob wives on Thursday afternoons. Their daughter, Isabella, was away at boarding school but came home some weekends. Their son, Michael, lived in the pool house and seemed to do nothing but party with his friends. The pay was good, better than any cleaning job Maria had found before. She sent most of it home to her sister, who was watching her children. On Sundays, her only day off, she took the train back to Brooklyn to see them. Her oldest, Jerome, was 16 and helped take care of his younger sisters. Every week, Maria promised them that she was saving money so they could be together again soon. After 3 months, Maria had settled into a routine. She knew which days Mr. Benedetti held meetings in his study and made sure to clean that room early in the morning. She knew which of Mrs. Benedetti's jewelry pieces were real and which were replicas kept in the safe. She knew that Michael often stumbled in drunk at 3 in the morning and left beer bottles hidden behind the pool house. One afternoon in May, everything changed. Maria was cleaning the library when she knocked over a heavy bookend. It hit a section of the wall that sounded hollow. Curious, she pressed on the panel, and it swung open to reveal a hidden compartment. Inside was a manila folder marked "Confidential." She knew she should close the panel and pretend she had never seen it, but something made her reach for the folder. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside were photographs and documents she didn't fully understand. There were pictures of men she recognized from the newspapers, judges, police commissioners, city councilmen. Each photo had numbers written on the back. There were bank statements showing huge transfers to offshore accounts. There were contracts written in legal language that seemed to involve city construction projects. Then she found the document that made her blood run cold. It was a contract dated just 2 weeks ago, signed by Vincent Benedetti and another man whose name she didn't recognize. The contract detailed the planned murder of a federal prosecutor named James Morrison. Maria knew that name. She had seen him on the news talking about organized crime in New York. The contract specified the date, location, and method. Morrison was to be killed in 10 days. Maria heard footsteps in the hallway. Quickly, she put everything back in the folder and closed the secret panel. She grabbed her cleaning supplies and was dusting a bookshelf when Mrs. Chen walked in. The head housekeeper looked at her suspiciously, but said nothing. Maria's heart pounded so hard she was sure Mrs. Chen could hear it. For the rest of the day, Maria could barely concentrate on her work. She kept thinking about the prosecutor's face on the television, about his wife and children who would lose their father. She thought about going to the police, but who would believe a black maid over Vincent Benedetti? And even if they did believe her, what would happen to her own children if the Benedettis found out she had betrayed them? That night, Maria lay awake in her small room in the servants' quarters. She could hear the guards patrolling outside and the dogs barking in the distance. She knew the estate was a fortress. Every phone call was monitored. Every person who entered or left was watched. If she tried to warn the prosecutor, the Benedettis would know. The next morning, Maria went through her usual routine, but her mind was racing. She served breakfast to Mrs. Benedetti, who complained that the eggs were cold. She cleaned the dining room while Michael nursed a hangover on the couch. Everything seemed normal, but Maria felt like she was walking through a nightmare. On her lunch break, she walked to the servants' bathroom and locked the door. She stared at herself in the mirror. The woman looking back at her was tired and scared. She had taken this job to provide for her children, not to get involved in murder plots. But now she knew something that could save a man's life. How could she stay silent? That afternoon, Mr. Benedetti came home early. Maria was cleaning the hallway outside his study when she heard raised voices inside. Through the heavy door, she could make out some words. Someone had made a mistake. Someone had left traces that the FBI might find. Mr. Benedetti was furious. Maria pressed herself against the wall and held her breath as the door burst open and 3 men stormed out. They didn't even notice her. Over the next few days, Maria watched and listened carefully. She learned that the prosecutor was building a major case against the Benedetti crime family. He had a witness who was ready to testify about the family's involvement in labor union corruption. If Morrison succeeded, Vincent Benedetti could spend the rest of his life in prison. Maria also noticed changes in the house. More guards were posted at the gates. Strange men came and went at all hours. Mrs. Benedetti seemed nervous and snapped at the servants more than usual. Michael stayed in his room instead of going out with his friends. The whole mansion felt like it was holding its breath. 5 days before the planned murder, Maria made a decision. She couldn't let an innocent man die, but she also couldn't risk her children's safety. She needed to be smart about this. During her day off, instead of going home to Brooklyn, she took a different train. She went to a payphone in Grand Central Station, far from anyone who might recognize her. Her hands shook as she dialed the number for the FBI office. When someone answered, she asked to speak to someone about James Morrison. She was transferred twice before a man with a serious voice came on the line. Maria told him about the contract and the planned date and location. The man asked for her name, but she hung up. All the way back to Long Island, Maria worried that she had made a terrible mistake. What if the FBI didn't believe her? What if they did believe her but couldn't stop it? What if the Benedettis had people inside the FBI who would tell them about the call? By the time she reached the mansion, she was sick with fear. The next few days were agony. Maria jumped every time someone called her name. When Mrs. Chen gave her a strange look, she was sure her secret was discovered. When Mr. Benedetti passed her in the hallway, she kept her eyes on the floor and tried not to tremble. She cleaned the same spots over and over, her mind unable to focus. 3 days before the planned murder, Maria was dusting in the library when she heard Mr. Benedetti shouting from his study. She crept closer to listen. Someone had leaked information. The prosecutor had changed his schedule and increased his security. The plan would have to be postponed. Mr. Benedetti was convinced there was a rat in his organization. Maria's relief was mixed with terror. She had saved Morrison's life, at least for now, but if Mr. Benedetti ever found out what she had done, her own life would be worthless. She thought about quitting, but that would look suspicious. She had to continue as if nothing had happened. The atmosphere in the mansion grew even tenser. Mr. Benedetti brought in a security expert to check for bugs and examine the phone records. Every servant was questioned about whether they had seen or heard anything unusual. When it was Maria's turn, she kept her answers short and simple. No, she hadn't noticed anything strange. No. She didn't know anything about Mr. Benedetti's business. She was just there to clean. 2 weeks passed. The prosecutor remained alive and continued building his case. Maria heard from the other servants that several of Mr. Benedetti's associates had been arrested. The family's lawyer was at the mansion constantly. FBI agents were seen driving slowly past the gates. The empire that Vincent Benedetti had built over decades was starting to crumble. One morning, Maria arrived at work to find the mansion in chaos. Federal agents were everywhere, carrying boxes of documents out of Mr. Benedetti's study. Vincent Benedetti himself was being led away in handcuffs, his face a mask of fury. Mrs. Benedetti stood in the doorway in her silk nightgown, screaming at the agents. Michael was nowhere to be seen. The head housekeeper gathered all the servants in the kitchen. She told them that they should continue their duties as normal. The family's lawyers would handle everything. But Maria could see the fear in Mrs. Chen's eyes. They all knew that without Vincent Benedetti's protection, their world was falling apart. Over the next days, Maria watched as the life drained out of the mansion. Mrs. Benedetti spent most of her time on the phone with lawyers. Isabella came home from boarding school, her face pale and drawn. The guards at the gate were replaced by federal agents. Expensive cars arrived to take away paintings and furniture. Maria heard they were being seized to pay for Mr. Benedetti's legal defense. A week after the arrest, Mrs. Chen told Maria that her services were no longer needed. The family was closing the Long Island house and moving to a smaller place in the city. Maria would receive 2 weeks' severance pay. As she packed her few belongings, Maria felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. She had hated the fear and corruption of the Benedetti household, but it had also been her refuge when she needed money for her children. On her last day, Maria was cleaning out her room when she found an envelope that had been slipped under her door. Inside was $10,000 in cash and a note in Mrs. Benedetti's handwriting. "For your discretion and service." Maria stared at the money. It was more than she had ever seen at once. It could pay her rent for a year and buy new clothes for her children. But as she held the bills, Maria thought about James Morrison, alive with his family because of her phone call. She thought about all the other people Vincent Benedetti had hurt or killed over the years. She thought about the fear she had lived with for months, knowing terrible secrets she couldn't share. The money felt dirty in her hands. Maria took the train back to Brooklyn for the last time as an employee of the Benedetti family. She had decided to keep $500 for her immediate needs and donate the rest anonymously to a fund for families of crime victims. She couldn't erase what she had seen and heard, but she could try to do some good with blood money. A month later, Maria was working at a hospital in Brooklyn, cleaning patient rooms for less money but with a clear conscience. She had moved her children to a better apartment and enrolled them in after-school programs. Jerome had started talking about college, something that had seemed impossible before. One evening, Maria was watching the news when James Morrison appeared on the screen. He was announcing the successful conviction of Vincent Benedetti on multiple charges of racketeering, conspiracy, and murder. The mob boss would spend the rest of his life in federal prison. Morrison thanked the brave witnesses who had come forward, including an anonymous tipster who had saved his life. Maria turned off the television and went to check on her sleeping children. She had been just a maid, invisible and unimportant in the eyes of the Benedetti family. They had never imagined that she could be the one to bring down their empire. But she had done what was right, even when it was dangerous. She had saved a life and helped put a killer behind bars. Years later, when her children were grown and successful, they would sometimes ask about the time she worked for a rich family on Long Island. Maria would smile and tell them it was just a cleaning job that helped pay the bills. She never told them about the secret contract or the phone call that changed everything. Some secrets she had learned were worth keeping. But sometimes, late at night, Maria would remember the weight of that folder in her hands and the moment she decided that being just the black maid didn't mean she couldn't be a hero. She had been invisible to the Benedettis, but that invisibility had given her the power to do what others couldn't. She had used that power to choose justice over safety, truth over silence. The Benedetti mansion was eventually sold and turned into a hotel. The family name faded from the headlines. But somewhere in Brooklyn, Maria Thompson continued her quiet life, knowing that she had once held the fate of powerful men in her hands. She had been underestimated because of her race and her position, but she had proven that courage comes in all forms. Her story was never written in the newspapers or told in courtrooms. The FBI files listed her only as an anonymous source. But for Maria, that was enough. She had done what was right when it mattered most. She had been just the black maid who uncovered the Mafia boss's secret contract, and in doing so, she had shown that heroes don't always wear badges or carry guns. Sometimes they carry mop buckets and dust rags, and they change the world one brave choice at a time.